Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat. If you're watching live with me, welcome and thank you for joining. Super excited to talk today about machine quilting and a little bit specifically about the tutorial I released on Tuesday. And if you're watching live, you know that you can type your questions in the chat. Jessica's here monitoring them, going to write some of them down for me so I can answer them at the end. She's kicking out all the bad spammers and just helping this be a great event. And I was thinking, you know what? You guys don't get to see her. I mean, I can look right at her because she's right there. So I said, Jex, why don't you come over here and pop your head in real quick so you guys can see her. So this is Jessica. She's our Director of Operations. Say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for coming. She's the one that makes it able where I can do all this in front of the camera. She's behind the camera. So if you ever see her in the shop or around, if you come by, you'll have to tell her hi and say thanks for everything that she does. Love you. Mwah. Anyway, so this week we had the second video in our Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along video series where we're talking about borders. And we talked about chunking borders specifically. And I was trying to think of all sorts of clever things I could say, like, let's get chunky with our quilting. But I thought, no, we'll just stick with the quilting. And then I also do have some events to tell you about. And if you're not watching this live, no worries. You can always leave your questions in the comment section. I try to get on there from time to time to answer them. So just a great way to connect and make sure everybody is being successful with the videos that we're putting out. Just kind of, make sure everything is good. Real quick though, I want to tell you about some upcoming announcements. I know that if you've watched some of my live chats already, you already probably know what I'm going to say, but this challenge falls squarely in a busy time of year for everybody. I know that May is busy. Us specifically, Jessica and I both have kids graduating this year, lots of tears, so it's been good to stay focused on the quilting. But then after we get them out the door, hopefully, then we're going to do our quilt walk. So June 3rd is our annual quilt walk, and I just want to put that on your radar in case you live in the Kansas City area or happen to find yourself driving through. It's a really fun event where you kind of get to wander around the historic downtown square where our quilt shop is located. We're in Liberty, Missouri, which is 20 minutes from the airport, 20 minutes from downtown Kansas City, and only 45 minutes from Missouri Star Quilt Company. And the joke is that I say all the time, I want to put that on the awning. Only 45 minutes from Missouri Star, but I thought that was a little tacky, so I didn't. So if you happen to be in the area, it's going to be fun. I thought I would show you a little sneak peek. I haven't shown really a whole lot of stuff about what's going on with that, but first, that's going to kick off, our quilt walk's going to kick off a week of events. We're getting the Handy Quilter long arm truck, and so we're going to have some hands-on long arm classes. Those are all full, have been full really since the week we announced them. But June 3rd, that's the wrong date on there. That evening of quilt walk, June 3rd, right? June 3rd. Sorry, that's my bad. June 3rd is the dinner and trunk show. So if you're going to be in the area, you can pop in. It's going to be a really fun event. The first time we've done this, trunk show, dinner, drinks, piecing potion. The date is right? Okay. Okay, June 4th is the dinner. Jessica gives me a thumbs up. Good deal. Check out the website. It has all the details. But it's just a great way to, see some quilts, hear a little bit about the story, get a good meal, get some tasty beverages or, water if you want. So you can check that out on our website as well. And it's pretty cool because we're not doing it at our event space. We're doing it on the square, but it's a beautiful event area, 1894 restoration, really pretty space. So I'm kind of excited. Little bit of a celebration of getting through Quilt Walk. So what is Quilt Walk? For those of you that are like, I don't know what you're talking about, it's kind of like a scavenger hunt. Not really, but you go to the different shops and you pick up pieces of the pattern. And so this is the exclusive pattern that I designed for Quilt Walk. It's called Town Square, and there's 11 participating shops, just real easy to stroll around. You get the piece of the pattern, and then you come to the shop, and our quilt shop, and get the finishing instructions. So it's kind of like you go collect all your pieces, you get to see the fun local small businesses that are around the quilt shop. And one thing I really love about where we're at is there's plenty of stuff for non-quilters too, right? So if you want to come to the quilt shop, there's restaurants, there's shopping, there's massage places, there is jewelry stores, there's yoga, all sorts of things. So it's kind of a fun way to get to see the area. And then if you come to our shop first, starts at 10 until 3, we'll give you the map that'll also have the finishing instructions, and you can go check off all those little blocks. So it's a big endeavor every year, but I just love it because it's fun to, get together with the other shop owners and kind of, do this thing. So really, really fun. And we'll have a couple other things. We have some raffle stop. We're giving away a quilt. And then we're also going to have a couple exhibits. So this time of year that I start calling in all my friends, like, hey, don't you want to send me some quilts? So Allison Glass is going to send some quilts for a little mini exhibit. And then we'll also have some quilts from Jenny Doan. So we'll have each participating shop will have some quilts. We decorate the whole square as much as we can without getting in trouble. And then we'll also have a couple spaces for little exhibits. So it's just a fun, easy, I mean, you could get in and out pretty quick if you want, or you can take your time, have lunch, have drinks, do whatever you want. And then also we're going to be doing, like I said, we're going to have the events going on that next week. The classes are full, but there's going to be a drinks and demo also. So there's other things you can check in if you're going to be in town. And the next weekend is the Kansas City Regional Quilt Festival. So if you want to just make a whole week of it, you surely could. Now, if you're like, I can't do that, it's just too much, too late, you can save the date for next year's Quilt Walk. Jenny Doan is going to be our featured speaker, and so super excited about that. It'll be June 8th, 2024, and we don't have all the details yet, just that we have her committed to coming. We're going to do exhibits, trunk show, maybe a demo, something with her. So really, really fun opportunity if you can make it. Again, I know not everybody lives in the area. One thing I love about doing these live chats is I get to talk to people from all over the world. So if you're, in Australia or Chile or, Belize, wherever you're at, and you're like, oh, I can't make it. Well, we'll still connect online, right? We'll still do our live chats. But if you happen to be in the area or making your way through, I hope you will stop by and see us. All right, let's talk, though, about our video tutorial that came out. For those of you that aren't aware what's going on, we've started a video series where we're working through a project together and we're learning how to handle the borders of our quilt. And we're kind of breaking it up into 6 different videos, and each week a tutorial comes out. And so this week's tutorial was about chunking your borders. And so we're going to talk about that and answer your questions as well. If you want to see any of the prior videos, all you have to do is check out my YouTube channel and you'll see all of them on there. So a lot of the pictures I'm going to show you today are from the expanded resource PDF. I do put together the free downloadable quilting diagrams. Please take advantage of that. Just a great way to have the tips next to you. I've spent so much time on the video, I want to make sure that you get what you need out of it. But sometimes things come up or questions come up or, little pointers I want to give. And so the live chat is a great way for me to just, give those little pointers or tips that didn't make its way into the video. All right, so we talked about chunking our borders, and what does that even mean? We're talking about taking our long borders and breaking it up into manageable pieces. So if we kind of rewind back to the first video, which was last week, we talked about border motifs. One of the appealing things about quilting your quilts is you have these cool border designs. They can really draw attention to the center of your quilt. They can really help highlight or hide portions of your pieced quilt that you love or don't love. But one of the trickiest parts is quilting it so that it wraps around. I mean, that's just the nature of it, connecting it at the start and end point so it's smooth and doesn't look noticeable. Managing that, how do you work through it? So the first video, we saw border motifs, where we just kind of like skip that all together and put some custom looking things and then fill in the rest. This next week, we're kind of still on that same line, right? We're still trying to figure out how can we quilt these borders so that, it's easier, but still looks impactful. And so with this effect, we're going to still get that wraparound look, but we're going to break it up into chunks. And so what I love about this concept is if you can get it in your mind and kind of internalize it and then, apply that to your quilts, it will really help you when you're working through them. But I want to pause real quick because just because I might want a wraparound look to my border doesn't mean that you have to. So like as you're working through these videos, if you're like, I'm never doing that, well then just skip on to the next one. These are just little tidbits to help you be successful in whatever way you want to quilt your quilts. One of the great things about teaching quilting is everybody has different preferences and everybody has different skill levels and everybody has a different machine. So you're going to find those pieces that help you and you're going to internalize them and hopefully make the quilting process a lot more fun. So this particular thing is the chunking of our borders is a little bit, I won't say more complex than the motifs, just a couple more thoughts to think of, a little bit more traveling, but it's not as hard as quilting, let's say, a feather all the way around your borders. So it's kind of like we're building off of that, kind of not getting more difficult, just another thing to think about. So when you're sitting at your quilt and you're like, I want to put this design in this border and it's going to be tricky for me, how can I fix that? How can I handle that to make it a little easier? And so this is just one of the easiest ways to do that. So instead of like quilting all the spine of your feather all the way around and then echoing it and then adding your petals, and then the other side. In that instance, I'm making multiple trips around my border, which is fine, especially if I'm working on a sewing machine, especially if I want to just stick with that same design, work it all the way around. But on a long arm, that's not so easy on the vertical border. So this is where I really kind of was like, how can I make those vertical borders easier? But it does apply to the sewing machine as well. Maybe you're within this much throat space and you want to handle that whole thing while you're there. It just helps you kind of take that big area and break it up into bites and make it easier to manage. What I love about this technique, though, is it works on borders of all widths, and it works with, you can come up with a lot of variations, a lot of different design applications. So in the tutorial, or in the video, we saw this, where we used straight lines, straight echo lines, and I used straight lines on the end. So for this technique, I really need two designs. I need one that's going to define my section. That's those vertical lines that we see there. And then I need the other design that's going to fill in between it. Now that design that's in between, or that main design, can be anything, any kind of design you want. But this technique really shines with designs that are meant to be long and continuous, like long echo lines, like feathers, like brackets, kind of like what we saw in that video. If I were going to fill in that defined segment with swirls, that's fine, but that's easy enough just to do swirls over the whole area. So this is for those designs that I find a little tricky to work my way around. But when we define our sections, then we have a clear start and end point that we can then travel between the lines. It gives us a way to transition to the parts of the design, and then I can move on and continue doing that. So I know it's a little abstract. I mean, I get that the tutorials that do the best are like 5 different ways to quilt borders, and that's great. But I want to show you how you can actually apply, how you can work through it. More of the technique, not so much the design. Now, of course, we saw some different designs in the video, but you can mix and match with what you like. So we started off with just straight lines. Let's see this design. We're going to create our section. We're going to fill it in and then move on. In the video, I talk about, I'm using straight lines to define the ends, but I'm going to echo them a couple times because I want it to look intentional, even if, I know it's easier for me, but I still want to look nice. So I always echo my ends a couple times and then fill in the space between. So when you're placing your sections, though, there's no right or wrong way. So this might be a little more freeing for you. With those motifs, I'm like, I like to keep it symmetrical. And then here, I'm like, just do whatever. The idea being, what we're going to get is that wraparound effect. We're not going to see so much the definition or the edges of those sections. So you don't have to worry so much about the placement. However, if you wanted to overthink it, you definitely could. So we saw the straight lines, and then we saw brackets kind of at the end. Again, another example of a long continuous line. There's no way to transition between the echo lines, so I love running it into that edge, and the brackets is a perfect example of where we can use that. But if you look on the right side of the picture, you can see I have some serpentine lines instead of straight lines. When you're defining your edges, they can be any design. And I wish I'd had more time when I was doing it, because you could actually quilt a little feather up and down and use that as the defining end. But really, any shape that's just going to give you a clear kind of definition there. Now, when it comes to your chunks or your segments, how big should you make them? It absolutely depends on you. What do you feel comfortable quilting? How much throat space do you have? If I'm working on my long arm, I have the Handy Quilter Avante. It has an 18-inch throat. I can get comfortably 16 inches in that throat space without having to worry about running into the pole or anything. So all my sections on my long arm are within that size, because that's what fits me. If I'm working on my sewing machine, they might be a little bit bigger because I don't have to advance the quilt back and forth. So there's no right or wrong. You can kind of play around with the technique and find what works for you. That's the important thing. And you can see here, I filled in with a feather. So I'm trying to show some different designs, and I know, you're like, I didn't sign up for a feather class. Well, I do have a whole video series about it that you can check out, but it just shows, again, how you can take that section, break it up, fill it in, and move on. So really nice. It just, for me, it kind of fits the way I like to do things. And you can see here, I'm wrapping that feather around the corner, but you can be very intentional about the placement of your segments and make it work for you. Again, you can play around, find the different things that you can work with. So in this green strip, you can kind of see a little bit of the quilting. It was very difficult to edit the picture so you can see the quilting. But on the end, on one side, I have diagonal lines. It doesn't matter. Diagonal, different designs, kind of think about what would be kind of fun. I like those diagonal lines because it kind of mirrored that piecing on the panel on the side. But again, I'm just defining a section and filling it in. So if you want to, you can start with the basic straight lines, but just know once you get comfortable with the concept of kind of working your way in chunks, then you'll feel more comfortable switching it up. Now, we're going to see that white border not next week, but the week after. But in the green border, again, you can see I had those diagonal lines in the corner. Perfect example of placing the sections where it's most convenient for me. If you like quilting feathers, but no matter how hard you try, you can't turn the corner with it, then put your end of your section in those corners, and that's just going to give you a clear start and stop. So kind of a cheating technique. I'm going to call it a hack. We'll call it a quilting hack. But when you're looking at your quilts, what will make this easier? What do I struggle with, and how can I place them? And you can also tell on those diagonal lines, I have them angled in different directions, right? Look at me. I'm getting super crazy now. But the idea is you just need to define a section and fill it in with the design that you want. Place them in a way that's easy for you and have fun with it. Now, in the video, I kind of talked about how I created my section and filled it in and then worked that way. That's always how I love to quilt. I don't ever want to come back to a section. It's kind of like I'm done with it. I don't want to come back. But if you're like, I don't feel comfortable doing that, or I want to mark out all my sections first, you can do that and then come back in and fill it in, especially on a sewing machine where it's no problem to rearrange your quilts. So in this just quick little illustration I did, this was not in the video tutorial. I think I might have said it, but we didn't see it. I went through and I just put a couple of serpentine lines to create my sections and then go back and fill them in with the design of your choice. So with anything that I talk about, I will show you the way I like to do it because I am the expert in my opinion, but please take that and wrestle with that and find what works for you, because ultimately whatever you will do is what you should do. And then we kind of zoomed in on what that would look like, that feather in those serpentine lines. Again, you can really kind of experiment with some different designs in here, different placements, and get some cool different effects with the same technique. That's what I love about quilting. I like it when I can do that. All right, and then in the expanded resource PDF, which is the more pictures, more things, it's like $2.99. I had this quick little example. Even your segments can come together to form a different design. So you can kind of see in the top picture I'm working through, I have my section, but instead of leaving the two sections, I kind of echoed inside of it to kind of add a little bit of a square there. Really simple, but impactful, especially if there's something in the quilt center I want to show off. So again, not meant to confuse you or overwhelm you. Just know there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. If you're not sure what to do, just start with the first one that comes to you and work through it, and it will be fine. It's through the doing it that you'll find all those variations and ideas. So every week before I go live on the live chat, I start looking through all my quilt pictures and trying to find, please, do I have this example, this technique on an actual quilt? As much as I can, I always try to include that because I think it's so important to see it on actual quilts, not just the panel that we're working on. So this particular quilt, you can kind of see in one of those outer borders with the blue, those serpentine lines. It might not look like it, but this is actually a medallion quilt. It's in strips. I love it, but some of the fabrics are the same. So it gives me that look that it's, background, but I quilted it as though it were borders. And I really wanted those echo lines just to kind of contrast with the curvy pieces. And so I love the look of the straight echo lines. I don't love quilting long, advancing, moving on. So breaking it into those sections with the serpentine lines allows me to make it more manageable. And then I could show it off at my Quilt Guild meeting and be like, oh, I just love the juxtaposition of the curvy next to the straight. I'm kidding, of course. You don't have to tell anybody it's easier. That can just be our little secret. But it just adds a little bit of an extra look, and I used to tell my customers back in the day, I didn't charge you any extra for that. That was a freebie. And it's a little bit closer. So one thing that we are doing, though, is since we're kind of breaking into chunks, we're incorporating traveling. So traveling is quilting along a previously quilted line to move to the next spot. So instead of breaking thread or trying to connect each line, I'm just traveling and then coming up. It's totally up to you as well. It just depends on what you feel comfortable doing. I promise it's a lot quicker than tying off. I like it, but you can, again, figure out how you want to handle that. And then just a little detail here. So I think this is like a 2-inch border. There's those diagonal lines and those echo lines. So again, really fun way to make those spaces easier to manage, should it be something that you want to try. Now, I found this picture. So this is a quilt that I made back in the day, a long time ago. It's kind of was the inspiration for the previous quilt. But as I was piecing it, started from the center and piecing rows and rows and rows. I'm like, oh, how am I going to quilt this? The same basic idea, right? I'm still going to break it up into sections and fill them in. But with this, I have so many more borders, I can maybe make some secondary effects with the sections. So even though it looks like a lot of background, again, that's pieced in strips. And so I can use the quilting, those diagonal lines, to break up that section and make it easier to quilt. And we can also see where I incorporated some filler as well. So this was also in the expanded resource PDF. Even though this technique shines with those long designs, we can still use some filler in there. And so adding some ribbon candy or wishbones or whatever will kind of break it up and make it a little bit more fun to quilt. But what I love about breaking those borders up into sections is the secondary effect that you get. You get some lines are coming here, some are going that way, and I could stand up in front of you all day and make this case like, oh, I just love the secondary design, da da da. It was just easier to quilt on my long arm that way. So you can really, take this as far as you want. And so I just have a couple pictures of, up close of that quilt. So again, you can make those lines continue across the whole multiple borders. I could break them off. And really I had no plan. I was like, I'm just gonna wing it and, fill them all in. And a little bit more, another picture there. So again, this technique is one that you can keep very simple if you want, or you can layer it with other things. You can create other effects with it. But the main idea is I just love being able to take this bigger area that can be overwhelming or daunting and be like, you know what, I'm just gonna focus on this space right here and then move on. It makes it a little bit easier to manage. And then again, just more close-up pictures. Now in the quilting, I'm using thread color that blends, but there is some contrasting thread to give it pops of, gold, because who doesn't love gold shiny thread? But in the video, I'm also using contrasting thread as well, so you can see it, but you can also use matching thread color too. Again, whatever you like to use. So I know it's one of those tutorials that's not quite like 20 different ways to quilt your borders, but just a great technique that if you can internalize it, it will really help you as you approach your quilts, whether you're on a sewing machine or a long arm. So hopefully you've had a chance to watch that. If you're not quilting along with us right now, because life is busy, it's graduation season, Mother's Day, birthdays, all the things, my videos always stay up on my YouTube channel, so you can always check them out at a later time. And it's nice that I've got such a backlog, so I can say, hey, if you want more tips on how to quilt this feather, check out a previous video I did. So you can always check out those previous resources as well. All right, so this is the time where I answer some questions. Next week, we're gonna be seeing a video on turning the corner. So up to this point, we've been kind of like, how can we make it easier? And now we're just gonna jump off it. Like we need to figure out turn the corner. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna see wishbones and ribbon candy as an example. But like all the other videos, the technique is the main thing. So kind of excited. Really fun question came up. I can do feathers. This is on the type chat before I went live, but I can't meander. That's because feathers have a set number of steps. Make the spine, make the petal, make another one. Some quilters love that. A meander is like, go whichever way you want, do whatever you want. And sometimes that can be overwhelming. Like, I don't know which way I want to go. So for me, I tend to do better with the meanders as opposed to the set number of steps, but that could be why. So it's kind of interesting that quilters gravitate towards different designs. And in every class, I'll teach a design and I'll teach an opposite one, and half of them love one, half love the other. It just depends on that. And then Betsy Ryan asked a great question on the type chat. I'm on my long arm. How do I handle this? Do I leave the quilt on in between the video series, or do I take it off? So I did touch on that yesterday, but I know or last week, but it's a big question. So this video series is actually 7 weeks, 7 videos. We'll have a bonus one on the borders, the border panel for it. And on the long arm, that's tricky. If I were doing this, I would probably wait till the very end and do it all at once. But you could take it off and put it back on if you want. Or if you have no other quilts to do, you can leave it on, but I wouldn't want to tie up my frame that long. Ultimately, there's no wrong way to do it. That's why the videos are always out. You can go back and watch them whenever. All right, now the questions that came up live. Again, if you're not watching live, Thursdays, 3 p.m. Central is when I go live, or you can always catch them later. You know, if you have to work or real life gets in the way, you can always catch them on my YouTube channel. I leave them on there. All right, I'm new to quilting. How do I keep my backing from bunching up? Do you mean ruching? So that's one of the things that you get those tucks on the back, and I love it because I like to say it's like ruching, right? It's textured quilting. That has to do with the basting. So if you're quilting on a sewing machine and you haven't stabilized your sandwich quite right, it's gonna be a little full, and as you quilt, it's gonna give you some of those tucks. It's not the end of the world, and I don't know why people, I guess I can understand why people would stress out about it. I don't worry about it, because I'm like, well, when you wash it, it's the back, it's fine. Can you tell I'm not a perfectionist? But another practical tip that will help you is when you're quilting, try not to twist the quilt as you're quilting. What I mean is, like, it's one thing to lift up your foot, rotate the quilt. Great. But just turning it and moving it, like, that's going to kind of create that shifting. The top might move different from the bottom. And so a lot of quilters will say, I'm going to start from the center and work my way out, because it just kind of drives the fullness out, and that's great too. But in this challenge, this video, we're kind of going from the outside in. So you can do either way. So hopefully that helps. Just know the more practice you get at making your quilt sandwich, the more that will work itself out. How should my tension be for my regular sewing machine for free motion quilting? Don't you wish there was a set number? I could say turn it to 75.7, and no. So your tension, good tension, is when the top stitch and the bottom stitch meet in the middle of the quilt and give me a nice formed stitch. So I should see almost a little dot at both sides of the stitch where it's kind of joining. And if I don't see that, it's because thread is in the top or the bottom, like it's pulling one way or the other. Unfortunately, that's an adjustment that you're going to have to make, and it depends on the thread, the needle, the quilt that you're using. So just know that if you have your top thread and your bottom thread on a sewing machine, if your bottom thread is pulling up, then you need to loosen the top a little bit, or vice versa. So tiny adjustments need to be made. Once you find, I'm going to back up. Once I found a thread that worked, it was so fine, 50 weight, loved it, it worked. That is the only thing I used for years, because I didn't want to have to change the tension. I was so scared of it. So once you find a thread that works, just kind of hang out with that, especially if you're new to quilting, until you get comfortable with all of the concepts, and then you can use any thread on the top or bottom that you want. So I'm sorry that's not a set answer. It's just one of those things I can't answer for you. I've never done ruler quilting. What is the best way I can learn from you? Well, it just so happens I have a whole video series on ruler quilting. If you go to my YouTube channel, look up Machine Quilting with Rulers Free Motion Challenge, or you can go to quiltingismytherapy.com and find those. I show you how to use different types of rulers on a sewing machine and a long arm, so that's the best way. I think it's great, and you'll hear, if you watch those videos, you'll see that, but I think it's great to start with a straight edge ruler, kind of get comfortable with holding it, and then you can branch out into all the different ones. So it's fun, and ruler quilting is one of those techniques that will grow with you on your whole journey, so hopefully you'll try it. In this tutorial, I tried many different designs, but on a quilt project, would I use the same design in each chunk? Maybe. I might alternate, or I might do feathers in a different one, or I might keep it all the same. I probably wouldn't make it like a sampler of designs, just because, I don't know, but you could do it that way. But yes, definitely in the videos, I'm showing a lot of different designs, and they're kind of right up next to each other. And so I probably would not necessarily use all the different designs on a quilt, but there's nothing wrong with doing that either. So it's whatever you feel comfortable with. If you're like, oh man, Angela, I'm just trying to like breathe and, quilt, then just do the same design. But if you're wanting to try some other ones, you can do that as well. But it is funny, I definitely quilt the quilts that are for the challenges differently than I would an actual quilt, because it's like, oh, what teaching moment can I put in this corner? What teachable point can I put over here? Whereas normally I would make it all symmetrical. Do I do the same thing on the other side of the border, making the sections match? For the most part, yeah. So like if I had a feather in this corner, I would probably do a feather in the other corner. But again, if I'm doing the same design in all the sections, when I step back, it's going to give me the optical illusion that that design is continuous. So I'm not too worried that my sections are all in the same size or in the same spot, if that makes sense. I just want to make sure that it's easy for me to quilt. I kind of want to backtrack on that. So if I'm doing this on the long arm, and I definitely need to use this technique on this long borders on my vertical, I'm going to do some on the horizontal, even though it's not quite as necessary, because I want it to look symmetrical on all sides. I'm not overthinking it, I guess is what I mean. Just remember, when you step back, we're just going to get that overall effect. And so you can mark them out if you want. I mean, if you're like, that will make me feel better, Angela, you could definitely do that, or you can wing it. It's totally fine. Don't you love the ambivalent answers I can give? Like, you could or you couldn't. But the truth of the matter is, I'm glad to share my opinions, but you're going to find what works for you, and you're going to run with it and be super successful with it. So great questions. Again, if you're watching this later, you can leave your questions in the comments. Better yet, you can go to our Facebook group, our Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along Facebook group, and ask questions there. The whole community is really great and encouraging. Share pictures of your progress and kind of, feel like you're in a classroom type setting. So I'll be back next Tuesday, like I said, with another video tutorial in the series. We're going to talk about turning the corner. I'm going to give you 3 different ways to turn the corner. I've got options, right? I've always got to have some options. And we're also going to see a couple different, we're going to see ribbon candy and wishbones. Again, if you're like, I don't love those, fuzzy face places like ribbon candy and I will never be friends, I'm going to make that happen, Leah. I think I'm going to make that happen, hopefully. But you can still use the technique to learn how to handle the corners of your borders. So until then, everybody, I hope you have a great weekend. I hope everybody does well, and I will see you next Tuesday and then again next Thursday for the live chat. So until then, everybody,